Okay, welcome to a video for anyone who is studying GCSE Edexcel Business Studies. It's for those people who are taking the exam in 2018 summer. Anyone who's taken it after 2018, this isn't the video for you because you will be on a new specification. So this is only for those people taking GCSE Edexcel Business Studies in 2018. Now this video is a little bit different to many of my others because this is designed specifically for a class and I will see some of them but not all of them, and I want everyone to be able to have the opportunity to make sure that they pick up on this organisational structure video and possibly recap it. As such, if you are watching this video, I'd probably skip forward in the video until you see this slide without trying to give too much away, to the organisational chart. If you're just after this bit of the video, skip forward here. If it's somebody who's in my lesson, then we are going to start a little bit further back. So have you got your brain in gear? You are in charge of a manufacturing business and you need to cut costs quickly. Is this the best way to reduce the number of staff or reduce supplier bills? What are the implications of your actions? With GCSE Unit 3, you're always going to be given choices to make. Both of these choices would work. Can you, if you're sat in a classroom now, your teacher will pause the video, or if you're at home and you've decided to watch this bit, that's great. Pause the video and ask yourself, how would reducing the number of staff work, and how would reducing supplier bills work, and what are the implications of these of the actions that you would take? Alright, so hopefully you were able to realise that reducing the number of staff probably wouldn't work as quickly as trying to reduce supplier bills. Now there isn't a great deal of context here. I haven't told you what kind of organisation it is, and it may change what answer you would go for if we had some context, if we knew what type of business it was. But reducing the number of staff probably isn't going to happen very, very quickly. In most organisations there would need to be a period potentially of a few, maybe even several months to try and negotiate with staff before you were able to let staff go. In more low-skilled jobs, it may be possible to get rid of staff a little bit more quickly, but again, we haven't given you that context. But getting rid of staff is probably a little bit of a slower process. Now, the implications of getting rid of staff, if you haven't done motivation, maybe we've not considered that yet, but there is a couple of ways that we could consider it. If you sack several staff within an organisation, it may frighten the other members of staff to work a little bit harder. It may make them more productive. It may make them work a little bit harder in the short term. However, what is likely to happen to those staff is that they are likely to feel unsafe within the organisation. And if you've studied a bit of Maslow, that will start to make a little bit of sense to you. And if you feel unsafe in an organisation, if you're thinking, I'm next, or if I don't work hard enough, they could sack me, actually it has the effect that it will reduce your level of motivation for work, reduce the level of productivity because you can't concentrate on your job. If you're not doing that, then the likelihood is that trying to get rid of staff, if you start sacking staff and the other staff don't feel reassured, we're likely to see that drop in productivity, which has a relative increase in costs, which will ultimately lead to a loss of profit for the organisation in the long term. If we reduce supplier bills, let's say we're a manufacturing organisation, we might just choose to buy cheaper component parts. Now that could be done relatively quickly. We could phone round suppliers one day and we could phone several suppliers, get different quotes and find out that we could change our suppliers. If you're a big organisation, that might take again a little bit longer to do, a lot more negotiation, a lot more thought if you are a big organisation and need lots of component parts. But changing suppliers should theoretically be something you could do pretty quickly. The implications of it should be pretty clear and link back to 3.2 in terms of the quality of the design. So if we start to change in supplier, are we getting component parts which are as good as the more expensive ones that we were getting? Are we going to see a decrease in quality? Because if we do see a decrease in quality, we will see less customer satisfaction, which will lead to less customers, which will lead to less revenue. And again, just trying to think how you develop these points into more detailed answers. For those people who are sitting in a classroom now, or even those again who are just watching the video in its entirety, this video is about organisational structure. It fits within topic 3.4, effective people management, and we're going to predominantly look at the keywords. There is a lot of key terminology. If we do a quick spec check, the key terminology, as indicated by the exam board. There's a lot of terminology. Now the key thing to bear in mind here is that organisational structures links with communication, links with communication and Maslow's hierarchy of needs and motivation. If you are doing 3.4, a bit of a 3.4 revision, don't revise one topic on its own. Organisation links to motivation, links to communication, and vice versa. You can't look at these individually, and the questions when they're asked are likely to expect you to bring in answers from other areas within 3.4. So make sure that when studying 3.4, you study it all together. Now, if you sat in my classroom again, I really want you to, you'll have the video paused for you either by me or someone else. If you sat at home and you're one of my students, then I really want you to have a go at this as well. You know how important I tell you the 3-mark answer is. Can you make a point and can you develop it twice? Now, trying to give you some interesting ways to try and revise in the run up to the examination. Don't necessarily think about a question that you are trying to answer. What you could potentially do is just throw down some of the keywords which are in a topic area and then ask yourself how you could build them together. So for example, if we just had a look here, if we've got fantastic teamwork in an organisation, this will lead to colleagues feeling very happy with each other, and this will mean that you will give better customer service because the staff are happier and therefore more smiley, so there's better customer service, which would then lead to an increase in revenue for the organisation. Or maybe good teamwork leads to speedy communication and better customer service. And I'll leave it there. You get the point. There are loads of ways to try and link this positively and negatively. You could do advantages and disadvantages. The words in red are words that I'm going to try and cover within this video, so they may be more difficult for you to factor in, but what might be good for you to do is after you've watched the video, come back and can you do this again and include some of these red words. For now, how many PDD paragraphs can you come up with? So point, development. Pause the video and see how many videos you can come up with in the next 3 minutes or so. Well, I hope you had time to come up with some really fantastic sentences there and really develop them. You may have been able to develop them more than twice, which is good practice as well. A really good revision aid. Get your keywords from any of the topics and just see if you can put together these 3-mark paragraphs. So this is where we're at. Organisational structures. If you're just joining us here, then fantastic. We're looking at organisational charts today. So an organisational chart is a diagrammatic representation of the structure of an organisation. So it's what an organisation looks like as a diagram. Who is responsible to whom, who works for whom, how does communication move around the organisation. Now I'll give this one caveat. This is one of those business areas which is quite academic. In reality, don't look for problems with the structures. It's really common when you're teaching this that students will go, but why doesn't that person just talk to that person? Right. Try not to think like that. This is quite an academic exercise. Every organisation I've ever worked in, the organisational chart is not necessarily representative of what actually happens within the organisation. So don't think about this don't look for problems with this. Just look at it as a very academic exercise. This is what I need to know. This is how I need to apply it. Don't look for the problems within it particularly. So first of all, we're going to look at chain of command. Now, chain of command, imagine that we are trying to get an information down to Bob and his team down here. How would we go about doing that? How would those orders be passed down? So really listen out to some of the keywords that I'm going to use here. So the chief executive is in charge of everyone within the organisation. However, the UK director is his subordinate. A subordinate is somebody who works for you. So the chief executive has 3 subordinates. The online director, the UK director, and the legal compliance officer. They are their direct subordinates because everyone beneath him is a subordinate potentially. So a subordinate is someone who works for you. Now this person has a huge amount of responsibility, but they will delegate some of that responsibility to, in this case, the UK director. They are trying to get some information down to our colleagues down here. So in this case, will go to the UK director, who will then pass it on to the human resource director, and the human resource director is a subordinate of the UK director, and the UK director is responsible for the human resources director, who then passes on some of that responsibility to their subordinate, the payroll manager. The payroll manager passes it on in turn to this group of people here who we've not got a name for, who then pass it on to this group of people, who then pass it on a little bit further, and it then gets down to our Bob and his team down here. Now that is a chain of command, the path through which an order is passed. Okay, in this case our chain of command has got several stages. It went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there was 7 people within that chain of the command, which makes it quite a long chain of command. Now when people are teaching organisational charts, normally they try and talk about things like Chinese whispers. A message that we're trying to get from here down to here, if there's 7 people, is obviously going to be slower and less likely to be the accurate message by the time it gets down here than if it was just passed through a couple of people. So as a chain of command gets longer, communication gets slower, and it also gets more difficult for the message to be passed on correctly at each stage. So a big chain of command can have some problems. In terms of its positives, as a bigger chain of command, if you've got people above you and you can see this clear, a clear path of progression. If I work hard, I will get their job. If I work hard, I will get their job. If I work hard, I will get their job. And you can see that it's quite an easy path to get back up. That can be a big advantage of having a chain of command which is clear, because you can see where your next level for promotion, for progression will come from. But when we're looking at chains of commands, quite often, if we're trying to link it to that communication, as we were talking about before, long chains of command can be quite tricky for communication. Short chains of command are better for communication. Interesting there, so there were 7 people in this chain of command. The number of different levels of authority in an organisation is what's known as the levels of hierarchy. In this case, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we've got 8 levels of hierarchy within this organisation. 8 levels within the organisation. Again, exactly the same as the chain of command. The more levels of hierarchy, the more difficult it is for communication to travel. But with the higher levels of hierarchy, often people at the bottom or the middle can see where their next step is, and that can actually boost or aid motivation, because people can see where they're trying to get to. However, some of you will already see that actually the more levels of hierarchy, if you're Bob and his team down here, this person seems a long, long way away from you. And if the organisational chart works as it should do, and in order to speak to this person, it has to be passed through everyone else in between, then you will feel completely disconnected from what's going on at the top of the organisation, and that can be a very demotivating factor. So with our organisational charts, there are always advantages and disadvantages of the way that it is being run. So if we skip on now, we're going to have a look at span of control, which is quite an interesting term. It's really straightforward though. The number of subordinates, and we've used that word before. Who are you managing? So it's the number of subordinates that a manager has responsibility for. Have a look at the chief executive in this organisation. How many subordinates do they have? What is their span of control? And when we're thinking about span of control, we're normally thinking about their people they directly work for them. Obviously the chief executive, their span of control is everyone in the organisation, but actually we probably, when we're thinking about span of control, think about the number of people you directly manage. So for this chief executive up here, how many people do they directly manage? Should be reasonably straightforward that you've come up with 3. Our chief executive manages 3 people. If we skip on now and have a think about our UK director, how many people does our UK director manage? Okay, in this case 5. they're responsible for these 5 people. With span of control, just trying to think about some of the advantages and disadvantages, a span of control can be quite a positive thing. If these people, as they probably are high-skilled people, directors of an organisation, they are likely to be well-educated, people with a high level of skills. We don't want to over-manage them. We would want possibly a wider span of control, because you don't, if you're the UK director, need to speak to these people every 5 minutes. You're not going to need to supervising these people all the time. You will need to give them a little bit of responsibility, delegate some responsibility to them, let them make some decisions, because if you don't, then these people will become particularly demotivated. They don't wish to be normally managed. High-skilled jobs don't want people managing them all the time. And therefore a span of control, a wide span of control, having more people working for you, is possible. If, however, the UK director needed to advise these people all day, every day about how to do their job, because let's say maybe they were lower skilled organisations, let's go further down the organisation, because at the top we tend to have high skills, at the bottom we tend to have lower skills. As we come towards the bottom of the organisation, it is likely that these production supervisors and line workers their span of control, the number of people that they manage, might get a bit smaller. And the reason it gets a bit smaller is because you have to take control and really manage those people, make sure they know what they are doing and make sure that they are doing their job. The further you go up the organisation, the more likely it is that you will give people responsibility and allow them just to get on with their job, because the higher skilled workers, we would assume that they can do it without as much direction. Now, delayering. It's not come up in the exam before. It was really popular within big organisations in the late 90s, I suppose, early 90s, and it was a process whereby an organisation tried to reduce the levels of hierarchy or shortens the chain of command. And the way that they did it was as simple as getting rid of a whole level of management. Now, I know when I teach this, people go, well, hang on, and they start to look for all the problems. Don't. All you need to think about is this. If you get rid of a whole level of management, you reduce the chain of command, which means the communication passes quicker. Now, we know that this has worked historically. I've told you that if you get rid of staff, people will feel demotivated, and yes, there's all these sorts of problems that come with it, but organisations all around the world, and still now, big organisations locally in Leeds, there's some big organisations which frequently have these restructures where they get rid of levels of management. Now, what they tend to do is pass that responsibility down to the subordinates here, and it may be that they see an increase in their pay, may see a change in their job title, and they will be given slightly more responsibility. But by getting rid of this whole level of management, the additional responsibility these take on probably won't be in return for as much money as they are saving by getting rid of these managers up here. But the key reason for delayering, other than the cost, is to reduce the chains of command, make communication quicker, reduce those levels of hierarchy. So when we're talking about organisational charts, there's 2 ways to talk about them. Those with more levels of hierarchy would be described as tall. Those with less levels of hierarchy would be described as short. So we have our short organisational charts, we have our tall organisational charts. We normally assume that as an organisational chart gets shorter, maybe through delayering, and levels of hierarchy are removed. So in this one we have 3 levels of hierarchy, here we have 2 levels of hierarchy, and you'll see that as we've got less levels of hierarchy, as we move from 3 to 2, we end up with a wider span of control. So the span of control within an organisation, the people that everyone is responsible for, or that a manager is responsible for, tends to become bigger because there are less people within that organisational chart. So as we go from tall to flat, what we tend to find is that the span of control changes as well. So what are the advantages of delayering? Reduces costs, speeds up communication, it widens the span of control. Now that can be seen as a bad thing, because if you've got more responsibility as the manager, say you're the manager and you've gone from managing 2 people to 4 people, that could be seen as a negative. But the reality is, most people, when they're given more responsibility, even if they're not given any more money for it, you are now, your boss turns up tomorrow and says to you, look, you were managing 2 people, now we really believe in you and you're going to manage 4 people because you are the best boss here. Surprised how many people will take that responsibility and want to live up to that level of responsibility. If people believe in them, they want to prove that they're capable of it. And this all links in again to that motivation. Here, giving workers more responsibility. Now this would be, as you widen that span of control, you automatically, if you've got a wider span of control, you're not going to be managing those staff as much as you would with a narrower span of control. So when we give workers, we have to, as we get a wider span of control, give workers more responsibility, and this aids motivation quite significantly. As we delayer, more training's needed, because everyone's job will change slightly, so you're going to need to make sure that everyone's got the skills that they need to be able to do the job. You might need to pay staff more, so it only works if the additional money that you pay staff is less than the money that you save from delayering. And as we've said before, getting rid of staff is always precarious. You need to make sure that you communicate well with the staff within the organisation, so that everyone who's left knows that their job is secure, because if they don't, they will feel demotivated, they will feel less safe, and as a result, productivity is likely to go down. So, the specification asks you to think about divisional structures and then some centralisation and decentralisation. The key examination questions have come on the difference between centralisation and decentralisation. A divisional structure is when you break up an organisation predominantly into the products that it sells. Apple was sort of organised in this way, in that people were broken into project teams, so you worked on the iPod, or you worked on the iPad, or you worked on the iMac. And if we look at this structure here, it's slightly different to this, but the chief executive would be in charge of the iMac team, the iPad team, the iPhone team. And then within those teams, you would end up becoming quite specialised. So people would be incredibly good at doing their job. The team, the structure beneath them. So imagine this is the iPad team. Everyone in that iPad team knows what they're trying to achieve. They're trying to make the best next iPad that comes out. Everyone is specialist. They all understand the iPad and they work particularly well as a team. And then you go over to the iMac team, and everyone underneath that's in exactly the same boat. They become specialists, they become good at communicating with each other, they work well together because they all understand what they're trying to achieve. So divisional structures can work really, really well when they're split into products. The divisional structure could be split into regions, as I've split it into here. So we have a USA, a UK and a European director, and so we break our organisation into regions. Divisional structures haven't come up in the exam before. For me, I think with divisional structures, and I could be wrong, but I think divisional structures fit within this sort of decentralisation mould, where you tend to give responsibility to the people in the different divisions. You allow them a bit of responsibility, a little of autonomy, and I think this is why historically the exam have gone for decentralisation and centralisation rather than discussing divisional. I would see divisional as a shorthand for centralisation and decentralisation of organisations. Once you break it into a division, you are likely to be decentralising, but you'd have to look out for the way it was worded in the exam. So centralisation and decentralisation, remember, these are your points. If you're watching this in the classroom setting, or if you're working on this video at home, you need to think and need to be making notes about how you develop these answers twice. So, for example, centralisation slows decision making. If you constantly have to refer back to a head office somewhere else and you need to run decisions by them, then this just puts more levels of hierarchy within the decision making process. It will make that chain of command longer. It will slow down that communication, slow down that decision making. So why is that a disadvantage? Okay, if that's your point, why is it a disadvantage? It's a disadvantage because a slow decision-making process will lead to less likely to satisfy customer needs quickly, which means that another competitor is likely to step in and meet those customer needs before you. This will lead to you losing market share, say. So we've got a point in 3 developments there. Slow decision making means that you're less likely to meet customer needs quickly, which means a competitor will come in and meet that customer need, which means you will lose market share. Reducing motivation. So centralisation reduces motivation because it means that decisions are made higher up within the organisational structure, and so staff feel less trusted, that they have less responsibility. This means that staff are more likely to leave, which means that the organisation will have to replace them, and it will increase their costs. Replacing staff is expensive. Okay, so there's some of the disadvantages of centralisation. Let's look at some of the advantages. If it's a centralised organisational structure, then trying to control the national or even the international or global brand image is very, very easy. If all decisions have to be run through a central organisation first, then this means that if the USA team want to change a colour scheme within the logo or letterheads or the way that the business's shops are designed, then it means that the central organisation can decide whether that's the way that the whole organisation wants to move or not. So it means wherever you are in the world or wherever you are in the country, it means that you will know that you are dealing with that organisation. It doesn't dilute the brand image. Ensuring consistency across the organisation, so very similar to above with the national brand image. This is making sure that all the decisions, the processes, maybe even the place that you get parts, the buy-in, all of that consistency is done within the organisation, which means that maybe you can save money. It maybe means that customers are more satisfied. Reducing costs. So again, just as I've sort of alluded to above, if we've got these centralised functions, let's imagine that we've got 3 different divisions. It might be that you want a human resource manager or a marketing manager in each of those 3 functions. But if you've got a centralised structure, maybe you have one person who does the human resources or the marketing for all 3 regions, but does it from a central office somewhere. Now that would mean that the effort isn't replicated in those 3 areas, and it might be that you could do that with all sorts of different levels of staff. So centralisation has the potential to maybe reduce the duplication of jobs. Decentralisation, the opposite, it should lead to higher motivation. You're giving people responsibility. This means they're more likely to be happy in the job, they're more likely to stay longer, they're likely to work harder, lead to better customer satisfaction, more revenue, increased customer share, increased market share, that sort of thing. Faster decision making. If you're telling people to take decisions for themselves, then it will happen quicker. Might not always be good. Might lead to this lack of consistency. Might lead to a poor brand image, which we'll come on to in a second. Ability to meet customer needs faster. Fundamentally, businesses are about trying to meet customer needs. If you're not delivering products which meet customer needs, you're not going to make any money. Organisations which are decentralised can see what the customers want, do that market research on the ground, customers coming in saying, I want it in this way, and then they can change that product, get in new products and do it quickly, much more quickly than having to run it past other people with longer levels of hierarchy, with more levels of hierarchy and longer chains of command. Reduce them, make decisions quicker. As we've said, it is essentially the opposite. So if we're decentralised, then all these decentralised areas might start making their own decisions about brands, and that may mean that it becomes confused within the organisation. Stores across a country, across the world, may become much less uniform, so you don't realise that you're walking into the same business, even within the same country. And the loss of central control. If you start to decentralise, but then you decide that you want to make a decision yourself, then it is very, very difficult to overrule and remove that responsibility and authority that you've given to the managers who are managing those functions, and that might lead to demotivation with those staff if you try and wrestle control for a particular issue, which again might lead to people leaving, might lead to poor customer service, and so on and so forth. That gets us to the end of the content. So hopefully you've got some decent notes. Hopefully you've made some notes if you're watching this video in the classroom, and now you'll be able to go on and have a look at these questions. So if you're in my classroom, we're going to move into purple zone, which means you're going to be doing this in silence. Depending on what stickers you've got on your book, if you've got an amber sticker or a red sticker, you're going to start with the yellow orangey questions, the 3 markers. If you've got a green sticker on your book, you're going to start with the 6 markers, and then everyone at some point potentially can have a go at the 8 markers should they so wish to. All those students who know that they're really pushing now to develop those conclusions, you need to try and make sure you get onto this 8 marker. What I'd ask you to do is not answer the question that you feel most comfortable with. If you look at this question and go, alright, I'm aware of what the main advantage of a short chain of command is, just ask yourself, what would I say as my point? How would I develop it twice? If you know what you'd say, don't answer the question. If you're looking for which question to answer, just go through them. How would I answer this? Oh yeah, I don't know how I would answer that one. Don't bother. I'm not sure how I would answer that one. Take some time. Really think about it and then start to develop and write your answers. The answers that I want to see in the book are the ones that you are less sure about. There's no point in me marking the answers which you're absolutely penned in on. Let's have a think about the ones that you're not so sure on, and then we can try and help you make some improvements so that if it does come up like this in the exam, or any of these questions come up in the exam, you'll be able to answer them well. So if you're in a classroom now, pause these. If you're at home trying to do some revision, then go through them as I've said. Ask yourself, how would I answer these questions? If you're one of my students and you do have a go at this at home, or you'd have a look at some of these questions, then by all means come in. We can have a chat about how you could maybe answer these to try and maximise marks in the exam. For everyone who's watched this video to its entirety, I know it was quite a long one. I really hope that you've managed to get something out of it, and wish you best in the 2018 exam.